Hey everybody, this is Heidi, and you're listening to the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast. We all know that the fashion industry is brutally competitive and it takes loads of hard work to get ahead. The problem is that everyone's secretive and tight-lipped about their ways. After working as a designer and educator for over a decade, I wanted to help break down those barriers and bring you valuable knowledge from industry experts, and this show is exactly where you'll find that. Whether you're trying to break into the fashion world, make yourself more marketable, launch your own label, or become a successful freelancer, we'll help you get ahead in the cutthroat fashion industry. This is episode 19 of the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast, and today I'm chatting with Kathryn Hilderbrand, founder of Good Clothing Company, a U.S.-based manufacturing facility that does small batch production and is dedicated to rebuilding the U.S. apparel manufacturing industry. In the interview, Kathryn shares how to educate consumers about ethical production processes, why doing smaller manufacturing runs and selling direct to consumer can be better for everyone, and why U.S. costs are starting to compete with overseas.
Wages, particularly in China, are almost the same now as they are in the U.S.
Before we jump into the interview, I have a quick favor to ask you. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help me get bigger name guests on the show by leaving a rating on iTunes. With more ratings and reviews, it gives the show leverage in convincing higher value guests to do interviews, which brings you even more valuable content. It only takes 60 seconds, and I'd really appreciate it. Visit sfdnetwork.com/review to leave your rating. And as always, thanks so much for your support and help. To access the show notes for today's episode, visit sfdnetwork.com/19. Now, on to the interview with Kathryn. All right, welcome, Kathryn, to the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast. I'd love to have you start out by introducing yourself and telling everybody a little bit about who you are and all the wonderful things you do in the fashion industry.
Okay, well, my name is Kathryn Hilderbrand. I am the CEO and founder of Good Clothing Company, which is, it's a multifaceted facility, but we focus on small batch production, full development, launch, consultations, all of that good stuff for independent and emerging designers. We also do large-scale manufacturing with some pretty big cats out there, and we're pretty excited to be, heavily involved in the reshoring movement and job creation. We also launched our house line, Good Apparel, which you can find online at weargoodapparel.com, because we kind of thought if you're going to be telling designers that they can do this, it might be good to put your money where your mouth is. And so hence Good Apparel, just as an example of sort of, it's our take on what we like, and sort of an inspiration, hopefully, to those out there doing it. Yep, it can be done.
That's awesome. So I have a ton of things I want to kind of touch on, but the first one I want to start with, which is something that's pretty prominent on your website, and you mentioned it just in this intro here, is your perspective on manufacturing in the States and reshoring and bringing jobs back. And I would love to kind of dig into a little bit of that. It's something, I'll be totally transparent, all of my experiences in manufacturing is overseas, and so this is a space I'm not super knowledgeable in, and so I'd love to just have you talk a little bit about, like, what are you seeing in the industry? Obviously you have two facilities and you manufacture product for designers and brands here in the United States, but talk a little bit about, like, your perspective and what you see in terms of manufacturing locally, and then how that compares to some of the stuff you see overseas, and why are you so passionate about that, and what's your perspective on all of that?
Okay, so it's probably the best place to sort of start is kind of why I think this is important, and from my own personal perspective. So before I ever got into manufacturing, I was a tailor, and I've been a tailor for over 30 years. I started in the industry at 16 under an Italian tailor apprenticing, and later moved on to own a few different shops, and was a mom at the same time and raising kids. And at that time, we were starting the offshoring movement, but it certainly, wasn't what it became, a couple of decades ago. Mm-hmm. And fast fashion wasn't really a thing at that time. So there was, the cost of apparel and the cost of the services related with apparel was more in line with certainly not being wealthy, but living a fairly decent quality of life. And at some point that began to decline, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. How did I go from making a decent living to not being able to get a raise for 20 years? And so, so I started taking a look at that, and what I realized was that there was no incentive for someone to invest $10 in a pant hem, which, by the way, had been my pant hem charge for, I guess 10 or 15 years at that point. Yeah. But there was certainly no reason for them to invest in that when they could buy the pants for $10. So this offshoring movement, what it did was that coupled with manufacturing, of fast fashion, it really just devalued everything associated with that garment, whether it's the services or, sadly, the hands that touch that garment. And that goes beyond those that we have been sort of taking advantage of in not all places overseas, but in many. And even here on our own soil, because that comes back this way. And that was kind of an eye-opener and really, really upsetting to me. So there was this social piece and this piece that was just like, this whole thing is just totally wrong. I mean, this isn't cool. You can't do this to people. And then there was this opportunity for myself to, manufacture a very modest line that I had at the time, because what I was selling was too much for me to make, but it certainly wasn't massive. And I kind of needed to go to bed every now and then, and I'm like, where do I go? Where do I go and make 50 of something? Because it's a lot to sew 50 of something by yourself when you're running a tailoring shop. So, and there was nothing available, and I thought, well, that's nuts. That's crazy. How does new business start? How do these new designers get off the ground? Where do they go? So I started doing a lot of investigation, and everything that I found out really bothered me, because what I found out was that we basically, I don't think necessarily 100% knowingly, but we took away a 500,000 jobs from U.S. workers in favor of doing things very, very cheaply in abundance. And in doing that, we also ripped away a lot of opportunities for new and emerging talent here. So we just wanted to be a part of offering an alternative, offering a service that at that time when we started basically did not exist. I'm really glad to see so many other cool companies out there, kind of taking on and doing the same thing. And we wanted to do it with minimums that made sense, like 10. 10 makes sense when you're starting out. And we wanted to offer them, full, soup to nuts, everything that you need to, what do you need? And we do it. So we started with that, and it was hard going, getting started, in the sense that it was a challenge. But what we found was there's this massive, massive need, way bigger than we could have ever imagined, which was encouraging but overwhelming at the same time. And I think, to answer the last part of your question, is that, to me, that was an indicator, at least at that time, that there is this movement, and there is this need for this, not only from our clients, but the consumer is changing, and the consumer wants to be invested in something that has a better story behind it. So I see that shift. I answer emails all day, every day, and it's the core of what we talk about. I think we have a long way to go, but I think we've seen a lot of progress in the last 5 years.
Yeah, there has been a tremendous shift, and I see it as well. One of the things I'm really curious about is, I know we lost all these jobs with the offshoring of manufacturing, but one of the things that I've heard is a challenge is to get the workers here in the U.S. to do some of those tasks, whether it be like production line sewing, or maybe something that's not super glamorous, and it can be hard. I've heard, this is not a space I work in, but I've heard from multiple people that it's hard to get those people to do those jobs. What have you seen with that, and what has been your experience with getting the actual workforce to do the manufacturing and the production?
That's a really good question, and it's a valid issue. It's important to talk about the fact, though, that it isn't a glamorous job. However, not everyone out there is suited for, wants to, has the desire to, the inclination to, whatever, do a glamorous job.
Absolutely, yeah.
Plenty of people out there who would be much happier with a chainsaw in their hands, dropping trees.
Yes.
So right, and so there is that sector of people. I happen to be one of them. I'm a real hands-on worker. I will break a machine down and get dirty and put it all back together, and that happens to be sort of who I am. So I understand that mindset. But we lost an entire generation of people, not just the generation that many of them have died off, but the generation that we were bringing up, the generation that we're bringing into this, whether it was from a trade perspective because the jobs weren't there to train them, or if it was from a design perspective because even our design teachings have shifted and changed so much. There's way less focus on construction and much more focus on tech pack creation and how we ship it off. So it has been a challenge, but I'm always one for a good challenge. So what we did was we set out to figure out how can we offer paid training to potential workers or potential employees, and so we were. After it took us some time, it was not an easy task, but after quite some time, we were able to be effective in receiving a large training grant from the state of Massachusetts. It is a matching training grant, so we'll be matching dollar for dollar, and $250,000 training initiative, which actually happens to launch next Tuesday.
Oh,
August
wow,
15th.
that's congratulations. That's really exciting.
We're super excited about it. So this is intended to create 45 new jobs over the next 2 years, and it's a paid training opportunity. So, we're stoked about that. I mean, we need these jobs.
Yeah.
And, so if they're not there, you got to go make them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so wonderful. You're doing so many amazing things, and what a cool concept. I mean, I love that you pointed that out. It wasn't something I had really thought of, but it's like, we lost all of the manufacturing for so long that, we lost all the labor force just due to their age, but there was also a big gap in these people who are coming into the labor force, and they're not getting the training to go into something like this. So what a great initiative to put that type of a program together. I've chatted with some people who have said, some of the people that they work with, they got their start way back, working on a production line. And I think there's a lot of value to be said for what you can learn and the skill to be attained in that process, and like literally getting your hands dirty. And I'm kind of a nerdy engineer too, and I love to build stuff, and I would be the one out with a chainsaw. So I can get that side of things. I know that that's also not for everybody, but I think there's something really interesting to be said about just getting your hands dirty and kind of learning from the ground up and understanding that whole behind the scenes process. I mean, it's fascinating to me.
It's hugely fascinating, and understanding how to execute something and why something works helps you to even further understand the design process.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of intellectuality that goes along with what we do. I mean, it's not all just hands dirty stuff. This is very critical thinking that goes on with many phases of what we do. But I always say, to anyone, I mean, if it all goes to hell in a handbasket, I mean, I've always got this I've always got the skill. I mean, that's never ever going to go away.
Yeah.
Never ever will I not be able to be a master tailor. I'll always have that. Yeah. My eyes go, whatever goes, that's always going to be with me. So,
I love that.
Yeah.
I busted out my serger the other day after I hadn't used it for 4 years while it was in storage while we lived in New York City, and I shocked myself with my hands just knew exactly what to do. Like it was so automatic. And you're right; those skills don't go away. They get ingrained in you, and you have them forever. Yeah,
it's definitely muscle memory. It's like riding a bike for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's so amazing. And where can people learn more about this program that you're running? Like if someone out there listening wants to be involved, or do you already have all the slots filled? Or
So we do have the slots filled for our first training round starting August 15th, but these are every 30 days. Oh. So every 30 days we're taking on 3 new people. So there's there's always a new opportunity. You can go to goodclothingcompany.com and contact us via our contact sheet on there. We do have 2, we have job applications and internship applications on there as well. Submitting a job application and letting us know that you're interested in the training is a great way to go. We are also working with our local workforce investment board, obviously, in our career centers, and we do have a bit of a list, but that doesn't mean we don't still have thoughts. We do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's great, and I'll put that in the show notes. And that goes for about 2 years, you said.
It's going for 2 years.
For 2 years. Okay, that's fantastic. Awesome. Well, really cool, and congratulations on that launching next week. That's really exciting. What a great time to chat with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd love to dive a little bit now into sort of the whole production process that you guys go through with your clients. So I know you said you do, you have some big cats out there and you do some larger scale production. But if that's okay, I'd love to kind of talk about the more startup independent designer who has an idea and comes to you guys and wants to get started, and walk through that process with us. So where do you see most designers approaching you? Where are they at in the process when they come to you and they say, all right, what do I do next? Do they have a napkin sketch? Do they, what do you see most? A lot of very directionless with great ideas, but not really understanding the direction, which really makes a lot of sense because that's not typically something that is either available or that they even knew that something small batch existed. Yeah.
Typically everyone is required to fill out a production application. We love their sweet emails and we get a lot of them, but we always send you back to the production application because we have to have that. It's what enables us to know what you need and whether or not we're a good fit or you're a good fit for us or where you are in the process, and it helps us to guide you. But typically through those production applications, basically what we're hearing, probably around 75% of the time is, I've been working so hard on designing this collection. I know exactly what I want. I'm a little bit confused about how to go about it, but I know what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And so for those people, we typically start off with a consultation, and we basically, kind of suck out the last year of design school, all the things that you really, 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 really need to know to go to manufacturing. And we give all of that information to you in an hour. We answer all of your one-on-one questions. We set you up with contacts and get you on the road. And if you're coming to us with just a sketch or an illustration, and as long as we have your specs, which don't need to be too complicated, some measurements associated with whatever your medium is, we can take you full development and all the way to the floor. Other people that we're seeing are, and that would be sort of the latter half, are smaller, more established companies, but they're still doing, sort of the indie approach and sustainable direct-to-consumer vertical model, which is really the way to go. They're looking to keep their inventory under control, but at the same time be able to access runs of, say, 100 to 200 per style. Yeah. So it's kind of that mix.
So 2 things I want to ask about. One, you say, taking this indie approach and going direct to consumer is really the way to go. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about your perspective and what you're seeing in the market with that, as opposed to selling wholesale to retailers. What are you seeing, and why do you feel like that's the direction for designers to go now?
Well, it's a combination of different things. I mean, we're all sort of kind of brainwashed to think what the value of a garment is, unfortunately, what a retail price of a garment should be. And so that kind of changing that whole dynamic that's taken place over the last 20, 25 years we've got a ways to go with that. Mm-hmm. So let's just all accept it. It is what it is. Consumers are willing to pay more than they were willing to pay, say, 3 years ago. But we're not 100% there where they're willing to pay, I think, what would support wholesale costing for U.S.-based manufacturing, particularly when it's anything under, say, 1,000.
Right.
That's one. And then two, I mean, sadly, because, you know, I'm a little older, so shh.
We won't say any numbers.
Shh. I'm sad to see the brick and mortars go, but it's what's happening. You know, I like the tactile piece of things, and I happen to just be old enough that that's sort of the way I always shopped, but that's going away. And so if you want to keep your inventory under control, keep your production runs lower, your costs per goods are going to be a little bit higher with U.S. manufacturing. Not much. We're actually fairly competitive with overseas.
Yeah.
But per unit, when your runs get a little bit lower, they're going to be a little higher, just because they have to be.
Sure.
Yeah, from a manufacturing efficiency standpoint.
Yeah.
But direct to consumer supports that. It supports, it supports that, and your profit margins are actually a little bit better than they would be in the traditional setup, and it's a great way to go, and it's how people are shopping.
Yeah, so I just want to further explain what I think you're referencing here for listeners out there who might not quite understand. You're saying if, let's say you manufacture something and it costs $10, then
right.
You as the designer need to make some money off that. So then, and we'll do basic Keystone pricing, which is where you just double and you double. And so if you pay $10 to get it made, then you sell it to the retailer for $20. Then the retailer sells it to the consumer for $40. So your $10 item just quadrupled essentially. Versus
Exactly.
if you go direct to consumer, maybe you had to pay a little bit more for production because you were doing smaller minimums. So let's say you paid $15, then you can sell it to the consumer, again, using the same Keystone markup for $30. So the consumer is actually getting a better deal. You're still able to make your profit the same that you would have been able to make it going through a retailer. But that's where the numbers start to shift, and it makes it a little bit more attainable for the end consumer to get that item, that small run production, support that independent designer if they buy directly from them and they don't have another middleman in the middle.
Exactly, because we've got plenty of massive companies out there that are handling all of that wholesale space for us, right?
Yeah.
So, the value that you're adding across the board when you're either structuring your business that way, or a shopper or consumer is shopping that way, or a manufacturer is offering services that support that there's value across the board. There's value to the designer or the creator because they're keeping their initial financial investment to something that's attainable or manageable.
Yeah.
And the consumer is getting a quality piece of good that they know supported something positive, something ethical. Hopefully they know that. Hopefully the designer's working with a company like that.
Yeah.
And we're reducing our footprint. It's a lot of good stuff out there. So we're seeing some great companies out there and we're working with them who are building their businesses that way, and they're very successful.
Yeah, and I love the idea. I think you've said it a couple times now, but like controlling your inventory. I think, was that the term you used? Managing it, and just not overbuying initially because it's. I've had this conversation with other people, but it can be a quick downward spiral if you overbuy, not just financially, but also emotionally. You have all this inventory you're sitting on, you didn't sell it. It can be really draining. It can be hard to kind of pick up and keep moving forward from there. And so if you start a little bit smaller, start a little bit slower, like you said, you might pay a little bit more for your product, but if you're selling direct to consumer, you can still have your healthy profit margin or your fair profit margin. And it can just be a little bit more sustainable in the long run to go that direction.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, so let's say you make 10 of something that they're $15 a unit, and if you make 100, they're 10. Let's just use some easy figures. If you make 10 of something for 15 a unit, you're going to spend $150. Yes, you've paid $5 more a unit, but you've spent $150. Mm-hmm. If you make 100 of something for $10 a unit, well, now you're out $1,000.
It's quite a big difference.
Right. It's very different. do you know if that's going to sell? Have you tested the market? Have you tested what your consumer engagement is going to be? Mm-hmm. You can make 10. If it's really popular, go make 100.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it is where do you put all that stuff if it doesn't sell? Does it go in a landfill? I mean, where does it go? Yeah. Think small, keep it all.
Oh, I love that. And so what are you seeing? I mean, you just were talking about like testing that and like seeing what your customer engagement is with that product. Like, what are you seeing some of the brands that you guys work with doing in terms of doing these small batch tests? And then, how are they doing that? Are they putting up websites and just trying to get people that way? Are they doing pop-up shops? Like, how are they actually reaching the consumer to test the product and then decide, okay, you know what, that went great. This one didn't go so well. This is what we'll do for the next round of production.
Right. So interestingly enough, and we test this ourselves with our own house line.
Yeah.
For our e-com site gets a very different engagement than our pop-up shops do. So we have certain pieces that do extraordinarily well at our pop-up shops, and then others that do extraordinarily well at e-com. We had a couple pieces in our first collection. They didn't fail, but they certainly didn't do as well as the rest. I think it's, you're putting it up there on e-com, or you're taking it out to doing the pop-up shops, or you're having, some sort of an event, and it's pretty easy to see. I mean, if everyone is going to the left side of the rack, that's probably the one you want to make again. Make it another colorway. Don't invest in another pattern. That pattern is working. Make it in black.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
And I love what you said there too, of this whole, like, don't invest in another colorway or invest in another pattern, just invest in another colorway, because a lot of that upfront cost is in sort of like building some of the fundamental building blocks for these pieces. And so a really great way to very cost effectively add another SKU is to just do it in another colorway. Maybe do it in a print if that works for you, or if that fits that style, and not having to invest in, because I think what scares people a lot is, I have to invest in all this upfront cost, and then I'm only going to make 10, but then you can reuse that in so many other ways down the road to recoup some of those initial startup costs.
Absolutely. And the reality is that whether you make 1 or 100,000, the startup costs are there. I mean, they are. Yeah. You have to develop it. You've got to make a pattern. You've got to source the fabric. You've got to make sure the sample works. You've got to resample, pattern modifications. If you plan on making it in any more than one size, you are going to have to grade that pattern. Yeah. I mean, those pieces really are there. So start with a collection that's manageable. Start with 4 to 6 pieces, 6 to 8 pieces. Test the market. See what's working. Now take that development that you invested in, and development is typically in the $1,500 to $2,500 range. I mean, we're a little less because we focus on it a lot, and it's what we do. But that's a chunk of change. And so take that $1,500 and make it work for you as many ways and as many times as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about costing, and you just threw out a few numbers there, and you mentioned earlier that you guys are actually quite competitive when it comes to, U.S. manufacturing versus overseas. And you don't have to share any specific numbers, but to me that seems really, especially for some, and I know it depends on the quantity, but how are you able to do some of that? Where are you guys being really smart and cost effective to make your production, your manufacturing really efficient, so that it isn't, it's 3 times the cost to manufacture here with you or with some other local factory than it is to go overseas? Or what does that really look like?
Okay, so it's a variety of different things that we decided needed to be done to keep manufacturing accessible. And so what we did was created a number of different revenue streams that were really needed. Some of them with higher margins that would be the offset that we needed for the lower margin that you get in manufacturing U.S., which is typically 8% if you're on a good day net.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, it's low.
Wow.
Very low. we have that, but we have the balance of other revenue streams that we have, whether it's sample making and things of that nature that do afford you a bit better of a margin.
Okay.
But the other piece that's really important to understand is that, wages, particularly in China, are almost the same now as they are in the U.S.
Yep.
And so the competition with China, at least from a wage perspective, from a sort of mastery perspective, because they've really been, they've automated and they've been kind of killing it for the last 20 years. We have a bit of ways to go there, but from a wage perspective, that whole piece that gap is kind of closed. That, and then we really practice lean principles. You have to add value to your end product or to the end product that you're giving to your client in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's purely about money, and so for those clients, then your run numbers need to be larger. But for many clients, it's about speed to market. It's about quality. It's about our efficiencies in, going from development to full-scale production in, say, 60 to 90 days, which we do all the time.
Yeah.
Just being clever and creative. We know what the challenges are, so that's easy. Once you identify the challenges, it's how do you take one thing at a time. I always talk about unbuild the house and then build it back. Identify all of the issues that you're going to face, and you're going to face 100 more. And how do you tackle each one of those things? So we've just been creative about it.
Yeah. So on that note, what are some of the biggest challenges, and how are you guys overcoming those?
Well, we talked about one, finding skilled labor. That's probably one of that's actually our greatest challenge.
Okay.
Still this mindset, sort of competing with this mindset that everything should be cheap, super, super cheap. Working with clients to understand that none of that makes sense. And not in a rude way, but if you break down, a T-shirt and how long it takes to make and the cost of goods associated and whatever, and you find out that if you got a $1.99 T-shirt, how much someone was actually paid, and when they, they hear that, they would not, I wouldn't work for 27 cents an hour either. I guess it is a little bit ridiculous for me to expect that pricing, but I think the biggest challenge, honestly, is just sort of breaking through this struggle that we have with pricing as a culture in this nation, and then finding skilled workers or training skilled workers.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's almost like you said, sometimes the designer comes to you and they're the ones that needs a little bit of education and training on why the price can't be $2. And someone else I had a conversation with made this comment, and it was such an interesting visual for me. They're like, if you really step back at a 10,000 foot view of a garment and think about all the different hands that actually touch that, from who manufactured the thread, who manufactured the button, the label, the hang tag, the poly bag, the fabric, and then all those little pieces and components have to come together to create this finished product. It's quite complex. And how are we, and this wasn't even the context in what she was explaining that in, but I look at it with what you just said. How are we as a consumer or a designer to look at that garment and the dozens, perhaps more hands that actually touched every little piece and part of that? How are we to expect that should cost $2 or even, an $8 dress at some of these fast fashion places? How does that even make sense? I no doubt, great analogy. And secondly, I honestly still can't wrap my head around it. I can't, it makes zero sense to me. I think about how we're willing to pay $5 for a coffee, but we really, really, really question if this garment that we're going to wear, hopefully for 10, 20, maybe more years, and that cost of that garment is probably in the same ballpark as that coffee, and that there's this huge,
thought process about it. I mean, it's serious. It's an issue.
That's a crazy analogy to think about. I mean, I just got the chills. Like, yeah, I want a dress for the same price as I want a large latte. That's really a thing. Yeah.
Go figure. I know. It's the shows like what you're doing, these podcasts like what you're doing, and the activism that you're involved with, and so many other great people in the industry, I think, who really are beginning to educate and change this conversation. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of the people who, and I was one of them, who are really looking for things for next to nothing, and who aren't really thinking this process through, honestly just don't know any better.
Sure.
Right? So if you got 100 people in a room and 80 of them just don't know any better and 20 don't care, well, the 20 are never going to care. But if you get through to the 80, well, 80% of your consumer base has changed. And it's my hope that, you know, continuing to have these conversations, continuing to be involved with, you know, mission-based business, socially based movements, and education and awareness, and just chit chat. This is what we're doing. My hope is that, you know, the next generation that comes behind me sees a fruitful and rewarding opportunity and just a better quality of life that's more engaged and more mindful.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like what you said, and it's come up a couple times in this conversation, is what maybe we don't know any better, and it's almost like what we've been trained to know or what we've been trained to expect. And I see it a lot in the fashion industry in terms of designers who are going to work for these really big brands in New York City or these other fashion hubs, and the wages that they're getting offered are borderline abusive sometimes, and it's because they've been trained to believe that that's just what it is. That's mm-hmm. just what I can get. I mean, some of these wages to work for really big names in New York City, I'm not going to say any names or numbers, but they're not even.
I know who they
they're
are.
Not livable wages,
no,
especially for New York City. But what's happened is that the industry's gotten trained this way. The designers have been trained, and it's the same exact parallel that we're talking about here, where the consumer has gotten trained to expect that really, really cheap piece of clothing. And so it's just a matter of the education and the retraining, and to step back and say, you know what, no, I'm not going to buy this dress for $7 that maybe I'll wear twice, but looking at some of these items as almost investment pieces, because I know for me, if I buy something for $7, I don't really care about it. I don't take care of it. Maybe you don't even ever wear it. And I'm actually not guilty of that because I don't buy something and not wear it, but I don't take care of it the same way as I would take care of a dress that I bought for $50 or $70 or $100. And so I think it's this whole process of people valuing what they pay for, and instead of paying for this disposable stuff, you know, think twice about where you're putting your dollars, and maybe buy a little bit less, but buy stuff that you really love and that you're going to take care of. And like you said, have for 10, 20, 30 years. Maybe you can even pass it on to someone beneath you.
Absolutely. And then you've just created this huge, you know, boost in that whole entire supply chain in terms of wages, in terms of opportunity for new designers and new business, because there's now value, and there's value has been injected back into that. And that's what creates a sustainable business model. Yeah. The nonsense that's been going on in the last couple of decades, that's not sustainable. Mm-hmm. The planet can't handle it. People can't live off of that. They can't survive, whether it's financially or spiritually. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work. Yeah. So let's just, you know, it's not hard to make the right choice.
Yeah. So if
once you know.
Yeah. Once you know.
Once you know.
Yeah. If I'm a designer out there and I'm going into production and I'm making, you know, my 4 or 6 pieces, and they're selling for X price, which perhaps arguably is going to maybe feel expensive to some consumers. Like, what are some ways you're seeing these designers educate their customer, educate the consumer, and help them understand, you know, this is the value of this item and here's why it has this price tag on it? So can you give any tips to people out there listening who maybe are stuck in this spot and can't figure out how to talk to their consumer?
Well, break it down. I mean, there are some great companies out there that are fully transparent, show you the whole process along the supply chain, what it costs for development, how much the seed cost, how much it costs to gin it, how much it costs to, mill it, blah, blah, blah. Break it down and be fully transparent about that, because in showing your transparency and costing, it's just like a non-obnoxious approach to educate someone, with the entire process of building this garment. That's one. Mm-hmm. And then just simply talking about it, and obviously targeting that demographic who already cares. But
sure.
Yeah, just talking.
So would that maybe be, talking is great, and I can do that on, if I'm a designer, I could do that on a couple different platforms, but perhaps like having a page on my website that's specifically dedicated to the process and like what really goes into these garments, and maybe like a printout if I'm at a pop-up shop, like to show people, hey, this is kind of what the journey of this garment looks like, and here's all the different pieces and parts that go into it. Is that something that you see people doing? Am I interpreting that correctly?
You are. Actually, I should have probably clarified talking, because I didn't just mean having the conversation. I meant being expressive, whether it's through written word, it's through podcast, conversation with friends,
yeah.
You have an interview, you're putting up an about page, you're, sending out email newsletter, your weekly or monthly emails, newsletters from your company, talking about the new things you're doing, the great initiatives you're seeing in your local region, why you sourced this textile locally, and why it's worth 70 cents more per yard, and what that has, what buying this skirt did for these 13 people over here in Pittsburgh, whatever. Those interesting stories that the consumer can engage with and can really feel like they can relate to. It doesn't seem far away and abstract and, intangible. That's a way to bring people in. It's genuine and authentic, and it's not a bunch of hype and, unnecessary fluff. It's the real story. And, don't underestimate your consumer either. What I will tell you honestly, the biggest thing that I've learned from this entire thing is that people are innately good. And if they're not necessarily being good at the time, it's usually because they just didn't know. Mm. So give people the benefit of the doubt and get out there, man, and do your thing.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to remind some of the people out there listening is, I think that as a designer, it can be easy to sort of discount the interest of, well, why I sourced this, or what really went into the manufacturing of this product, and we can look at that and say, well, my customer doesn't really care. But I think that's shifting, and I also think that people are genuinely fascinated with the behind-the-scenes stuff. They don't always want to see the perfect, glamorous front side of things. I think on some level they're even more interested with the behind-the-scenes stuff. So tell them those stories, bring them into the process with you, and people love that more than I think unless you've actually had those conversations with your customer and you've shared that and you've gotten their feedback and their reaction, you might not realize how interested most people really are in all of that behind-the-scenes process.
Absolutely.
And so I think as a designer, bring people into that story, because they love it more than if you haven't brought them into that story yet, they love it more than I think you'll realize. And some of the stuff that you might think is, oh, that's not that interesting, that's boring, or that's something I do every day. A lot of people are actually really fascinated with that. So tell that story, let them be part of the journey with you. That's such an important learning process, and engaging process, for you to go through with them. So don't be afraid to tell them the good, the bad, the ugly, and all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into building your brand, and with maybe some filter on some of that stuff. But
right. Just a little.
So, Kathryn, this has been so much fun to chat with you, and I'm really, really thrilled about everything you guys are doing, and the programs you're running to help, train some of these people to do the labor that we seem to have lost over the past few decades. Is there anything else you'd like to share with everybody listening about what you guys are working on?
Well, we just expanded our Fall River facility. Actually, merged two facilities. So we're happy to talk about. We're happy to announce that we've had an expansion and we'll be expanding again.
Awesome.
Here in the next couple of months. Obviously, the training program is big on our favorites. Good Apparel will have another collection coming out in the next 45 days or so. We're excited about that. But basically, we just get to go to work every day and really, really, really love what we do and really, really love the community that we're involved in. So Heidi, I really seriously thank you for this opportunity. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you and love what you're doing.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. I do have one last question that I end with on every episode, and it tends to stump people a little bit. So if you need a second to think about it, feel free to take your time. But what is one thing that people never ask you about working in fashion, but you wish they did?
Oh my gosh. Oh, let me think. That's a really, really, really tough question, Heidi.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one of the things that I wish most people who were coming into the world of fashion knew and understood fully, because I think it can be very disenchanting, is that I think that there tends to be this sort of mystical, magical thing, this fashion world, this, great outer space of fashion. Yeah. And we tend to, I think, I was guilty of it in my youth, tend to look at this as more of a celebrity kind of driven. I don't know I can't think of the words to exactly describe what it is that I'm trying to say right now. But I think what I'm trying to say is that it's not all about glory and sitting around in beautiful fine threads and having cocktails and talking about your next collection. This is really, really hard work.
Yeah.
And I think there's a misconception about that. So
yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, Kathryn, where are the two places? Because I know you guys have your manufacturing website and then your clothing website, and I'll put both of them in the show notes. But just tell everybody quickly before we shut off here.
Awesome. So you can go to goodclothingcompany.com for manufacturing inquiries, jobs, internships, or training opportunities. And if you want to check out our house line, you can find Good Apparel at weargoodapparel.com.
And that's WEAR goodapparel.com. Fantastic. And I will put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Kathryn. This has been really, really fun to chat with you. And congrats on everything you guys are doing and the progress you've made. And really look forward to watching your journey progress.
Thanks so much, Heidi. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to episode 19 of the Successful Fashion Designer Podcast. If you'd like to learn more about any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit the show notes at sfdnetwork.com/19. And since you've made it this far, you must have liked the episode. I'll remind you again that the more ratings and reviews we get gives me leverage to convince higher value guests to do interviews. This in turn brings you even more valuable content. If you can take 60 seconds to leave a review on iTunes, your tiny bit of help goes towards making the show better for you and everyone. It's super easy to do, and I'd really appreciate it. Visit sfdnetwork.com/review to leave your rating. And as always, thanks so much for your support and help.